大家晚上好，今天的论坛即将开始，请大家有序入座。Good evening, everyone. The forum is about to begin. Please take your seats in an orderly manner. 尊敬的各位来宾，晚上好！欢迎大家莅临都柏林大学爱尔兰中国研究院系列讲座第56届孔子博士论坛。本次论坛由都柏林大学爱尔兰中国研究院、都柏林大学孔子学院、都柏林大学教育学院、爱尔兰中国学生学者联谊会和都柏林大学中国学生学者联谊会共同举办。我是今晚的主持人王佳慧。在论坛开始之前，请大家将手机调至静音，共同营造一个良好的听讲环境。感谢大家的配合。Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Welcome to the Irish Institute for Chinese Studies Public Lecture Series and 56th Confucius PhD Forum, co-organized by the UCD Irish Institute for Chinese Studies, UCD Confucius Institute, UCD School of Education, Chinese Students and Scholars Association Ireland, and UCD Chinese Students and Scholars Association. I'm Jia Hui Wang, your host for this evening. Before we begin, I kindly ask everyone to mute their cell phones to ensure a pleasant listening environment. Thank you for your cooperation. 本次论坛共有3个环节：嘉宾演讲、问答环节以及会后的中式晚餐。This forum consists of 3 parts: the guest lecture, followed by a Q&A section, and lastly, a Chinese dinner. 首先，请都柏林大学爱尔兰中国研究院、都柏林大学孔子学院的王黎明王院长对大家的到来表示欢迎。First, I would like to invite Professor Li Ming Wang, Director of the UCD Irish Institute for Chinese Studies and UCD Confucius Institute, to deliver the welcome remarks. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Professor Wang.
Good evening, everyone. It's a full house. That has been a long time. This lecture room is a full house. It's a very popular topic today. We are going to listen to Professor Benati. Okay, as the director of the Irish Institute for Chinese Studies and the UCD Confucius Institute, so I would first like to extend a warm welcome to all of you, especially those who have traveled from afar, to join us on this occasion. So before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to take a moment to provide you with the context of this lecture. So as you can see from the screen, we have 3 titles here. First, we are here to launch a new book entitled Second Language Teacher Education, a Cognitive and Evidence-Based Perspective, so authored by Professor Alessandro Benati. Second, this lecture is part of Irish Institute of Chinese Studies public lecture series. We invite world-renowned speakers to give lectures at the UCD 4 to 6 times a year. Third, this is the 56th Confucius PhD Students Forum. This forum, which has been running since 2009, is organized jointly by the Chinese Students and the Scholars Association and the Confucius Institute. Now, it's my great honor and a privilege to introduce our distinguished speaker, Professor Alessandro Benati. He is currently the head of UCD School of Education and a leading expert in second language acquisition. So more importantly, since he joined UCD last year, he has been working closely with our institute in developing our MA program, and as well as several new joint initiatives. Professor Benati received his undergraduate degree from the University of Florence, Italy, and then went on and earned his MSc and a PhD from the University of Greenwich, UK. He became a full professor in 2012 and has held prominent roles in various institutions across the world, such as University of Portsmouth, University of Greenwich, University of Hong Kong, and the University of Sharjah. He's also the co-author of several influential books and articles published in top journals. And his research has been recognized as internationally excellent. So the topic of today's lecture is reshaping language teaching policies and the teacher education program, the roles of second language acquisition, theory, and research. Without further ado, let's welcome Professor Benati.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah, can you hear me? Perfect. I'll stand here then so you can see the two screens. Okay, well, first of all, I'd like to thank the director of the Institute for this invitation. This is my second talk in the Republic of Ireland. The first one was, I think, over 20 years ago. Thinking that before, I was telling David, it was in Galway, University of Galway. So this is the second one, but definitely, this is really, amazing that so many people attending my talk. Usually that doesn't happen. 20, 15. So no pressure. better be good. So what I would like to talk to you about really is not just the book launch. Obviously, this is the book I recently published, and I wrote this book actually when I find out that I was offered this job, believe it or not. And I was in Hong Kong, and I wrote it in 3 months. I have to say it's true. Because I thought about undergraduate students, because I never taught undergraduate students actually, in the new BHEad in language education that was launched by the School of Education. And I thought I got to write something that is accessible to undergraduate students. Not that the undergraduate students are very, very intelligent, good, and very capable, but I think that when we're talking about second language acquisition, theory, research, could be quite complex, it's a lot of jargon. And so I was thinking, oh gosh, and this is a big challenge for me. And I remember asking my son to read it, doesn't know very much about being a philosopher, about second language acquisition. He said, I understood it. So I thought, okay, if he understood it, then it should be okay. But I have to say that the student last year helped me to improve the content. And now this year, the students actually using it. And I hope it's working. But I'm not here to talk about the book. I will say a few things later on. I'm here to talk to you about language teaching, teacher education, teacher training programs, and in general, policies around language teaching, language assessment. In my experience, really, obviously, I'm an expert of second language acquisition. I've been doing this research around second language acquisition, looking at different aspects of that for many, many years, over 30 years now. But I think I observed during my time in the UK, most of my career was spent in the United Kingdom, but also when I was abroad, I noticed some kind of similarities about the way languages are taught and what people think about languages and the beliefs that they have and the assessment and the policies that governments have about languages. And I think in Ireland is not different. So I just want to talk to you about this. I hope it's useful, and I hope it's, and also we will have lots of time for questions because my talks are short. Because I know that after 30 minutes, people possibly, when I talk, probably after 10 minutes, people switch off. So because I know that, I just tend to be, short and sharp. So I'll try to do everything in 30 minutes. So we've got plenty of time for discussion and questions. Okay. So this is the thing I've noticed over the years, over the last 30 years. not only my country, started from my country. In Italy, probably we still teach languages like in the 16th century, and I don't think there's not much improvement, but unfortunately. But it looks like, yeah, we teach languages very traditional. And also we assess language very traditionally. And this is common, as I said, in many, many countries. Perhaps in the United States, it's a little bit better because they now put experts of second language acquisition as head of languages department for Eastern University. So their curriculum is a little bit better in terms of it reflects what we know about how we learn languages. But in general, it's very, very traditional approaches to language teaching, still very much the case. And also, unfortunately, I noticed that the training for teachers is very traditional. I always argue for evidence-based, as I called in the book, evidence-based approach to teacher training education, because I think it's not about what I believe, but is about what has been proved by research in second language acquisition, for instance. So what we know now is we know quite a lot about how we learn languages, and we need to then extrapolate that information and improve the way we teach in actual languages. Unfortunately, teacher training programs are very traditional, still based on very traditional beliefs about how languages are acquired. And this is across the board. I'm not just talking about Ireland. Unfortunately, in many, many countries. The other thing I've noticed, because I was involved into the discussion here in Ireland with colleagues about the new junior cycle, MFL, Model for Languages, and the actual curriculum that has been introduced is based on the European framework. So it's actually much better. It's not as traditional as it used to be. However, I noticed that there is clearly a mismatch between the curriculum and actually what teachers do in the classroom. Again, there seems to be misunderstanding, for instance, about what a language task is. Some of the teachers have showed me, oh, this is the language task I use for teaching. And I thought, oh, this is not a language task. I think this is what we call an exercise. So you're actually practicing a linguistic feature through that exercise in a very mechanical way. This is not a language task. So there is kind of lack of knowledge about what actually language task is, for instance, just to give an example. So there is a mismatch between language curriculum and actual teacher training, again, and teacher teaching languages in school and also in university, I have to say. Also, what I've noticed is there's a lot of misconceptions about key principles, in my view. For instance, there's a lot of misconception about what language is, or what communication is, or what our acquisition actually happens. And very often language is equated to communication. So there's language. What is language? Oh, it's like communicate, it's like speaking. But we know that language and communication are two different things. And also the other clear misconception is that we're not learning languages through culture. We might be interested about the culture, and this is great. We can have courses on culture, but learning languages not through culture. Finally, I've noticed that there's really, really poor integration of technology. Or we have, again, it's another misconception here. For instance, when I talk to people that are engaging in technology, use of technology for teaching languages, the idea is that, oh, God, we're using artificial intelligence or we use VLE to teach languages. It becomes like a methodology, okay? I think that is wrong because, again, it's not a methodology. It might be a tool, it might be an important tool to teach languages, but it cannot just be seen as a methodology. So, again, poor integration and, again, misconception about the role of technology. So, overall, I think one of the problems is that there is a clear difference. One of the things is that I would say is that there is a clear difference between a fact and a belief. I could believe that we learn language in this and that way, but there are facts, and we need to be aware of those facts. So, for instance, I'll just give an example. Comprehensible and meaningful input. We all know, researchers have been doing this for a long time, and we have lots of evidence showing that exposing learners to comprehensible and meaningful input plays a fundamental role in language acquisition. And so we have to then show teachers how we can implement that in a classroom. But this is not a theory that must be proved. This is actually a fact, and it's a fact that needs to be explained. And again, I see very little evidence of that in teacher training education. Another example, there is a clear distinction between implicit knowledge about the language and explicit knowledge. And there is a distinction, and this is not an hypothesis, it's a fact. Actually, the two systems are separated, and actually even neurolinguists are clearly telling us that they cannot connect. One does not turn into another. The third example is that language is not a skill and is not simply a set of rules, are facts. So language is not a skill. It cannot be equated to a skill like learning how to play tennis or driving a car or playing chess, okay? And it's not simply a set of rules, because actually we don't have rules in our head. Not in the classic sense, not in the way you see in textbooks. So there are kind of some very clear, observable, and measurable facts that we should know, and more important, it should be explained to teachers. And the implication for teaching should be highlighted. I think this is what we have to do in teacher training program. So, an old belief is that, for instance, I have this discussion all the time when I do teacher training or when I teach in my class, both master's level, undergraduate level. We teach grammars because we believe that language is a set of rules and explicit knowledge become implicit knowledge. And this is what, unfortunately, is a belief, and it's a popular belief. The fact is that there are no rules in the classic sense. As I said, we don't have rules in our head. We're not processing language. We don't even comprehend language through rules. They don't exist in that sense. We process language and we process connection. We know that we connect words, which is the basic unit of language acquisition. We connect words with meaning. And we do this at implicit level. We're not even aware of doing that. Obviously, the input is key for that. So input needs to be comprehensible and meaningful, as I said before, but this is the way we internalize language. And so we don't internalize language through practice. So practice does not make perfect. Also, language is very abstract. If we were to display language in our mind, this mental representation that we call language, it would be a set of mathematical formulas. And so it's very, very abstract. It's very complex because we know it's made of multi-componential. No? We know language is not just morphology or phonology or syntax. And when I say syntax, phonology, morphology, some of my students always look at me and say, what are you talking about? What? What is syntax? I think, again, we need to make this accessible to everyone. What is syntax? And teachers don't know what syntax. Sometimes they don't know what syntax is. But anyway, going back to language, language is complex, multi-componential. It's not just this, it's discourse, it's linguistics. I can make a long list of what language pronunciation. So, abstract, complex, and implicit. We need to recognize that acquisition is implicit and unconscious. We have mechanisms inside our mind that they are activated, things are happening, we have no control. And those mechanisms are specifically designed for language. Language is special. It's not like anything else. It cannot be reduced like anything else. It cannot be learned by imitating behavior or by practicing. Practice. Those mechanical activities that we expose learners to, those drills. And we know that drills don't work. you know, but we don't know now. We knew 20, 30 years ago. We moved on in my field, we don't even talk about this. And maybe we haven't been good at communicating that to teachers, but certainly teacher training program needs to be delivered in a different way. Explicit does not become implicit. They are qualitatively different, and no mechanism exists that explain the connection, because there is no connection. It's not that something that I learn explicitly then turn into the implicit system that we call language, this mental representation of language. It doesn't. Yeah, there is not. People might say there is a theory. Yeah, there is a theory in second language acquisition called the skill acquisition theory. No proofs. Keep asking. And I see my friend, the Kaiser, at some conferences sometime. It's an American scholar that developed this theory. We keep talking to Michaels. So where is the evidence? There's no evidence. There's no evidence showing that actually what we learn explicitly can become into this internal system that we call language. Two separate systems. Now, unfortunately, these old beliefs that we have a negative effect. Okay, many negative effects actually. I use the word perpetuation of personal and old beliefs because very often when I engage with teachers and I ask teachers, for example, what do you think communication is? They believe that written communication is question and answer. They believe that communication is simply speaking. They believe that communication is basically engaging in discussions, what we call it open-ended questions or open-ended discussions. And most teacher tells me that. I have never heard a teacher give me a proper definition of communication. They are in the dark, teachers, about communication, for instance, which is a basic principle. And I say, well, communication is much more than this, much more than speaking. Communication is the interpretation of language. Communication is negotiation of meaning. Communication is the expression of the language, but in a context for a purpose, much more than simply speaking, and certainly much more than simply question answer. If I'm in front of, I've noticed that all the time, teachers ask questions in front of the classroom and say, for example, what did you do last night? And no one answer. Maybe one person that is maybe a little bit more confident, say, oh, I went to the cinema. And that's it. Most of the time the teacher speaks, and that's not communication. Unfortunately, this is the kind of practice we still see in language teaching in school, and unfortunately in university, I must say. So there are misconceptions, and those misconceptions turn into the use of traditional methodologies, still the use of drills or the use of long explicit informations, providing those paradigms, we call it, those tables with all the rules. And then the students have to repeat, learn all those rules with the hope that practicing like this for many, many hours at the end will lead to acquiring the language, which that's not the case. So it's not just methodology, it's not the traditional textbooks, it's not just the curriculum, it's not just assessment. The problem is the ineffective teacher educations. These beliefs have a very negative effect in shaping teacher training education in the wrong way. The other negative effect of these old beliefs and popular beliefs, not based on facts, is unfortunately, in my field, I've seen a lot of research not conducted properly, not very scientific, and also lots of anecdotal research, which I have to say that does not have a great value in my view. So again, this is unfortunately the result of these old beliefs and these popular beliefs. So the solution is this, for instance, is that we should not keep training teachers to use textbooks, to use a specific textbooks. We spend a lot of time, I notice, when we do teacher training, we focus on the use the textbooks. So we train the teacher to use a textbook. Whatever textbook is, most of the time those textbooks are very traditional, unfortunately. So we should stop doing that, in my view. That's my view, by the way, we're going to have a discussion. The second point, very, very important. This is what I've been doing for the last 10 years at least, by publishing some books, but more importantly, textbooks, but more importantly, developing CPDs for language teachers, is introduce module that talked about communication, that really explore what communication is and how communication can be implemented in the classroom. Number one. Language, explain exactly what language is, clarify what language is. 3, language acquisition. We really need to reconnect to language acquisition theory and research and tell teachers, this is what we know about how people learn languages, and this is what you could benefit a lot from this, and this is the information that you can extract and make it and developing better approaches to language teaching. So we need to talk about communication, we talk about language, we talk about how we acquire languages. And the other thing is that we should move away, in my view, from all these methodologies. We have grammar translation in the 40s. We have then the Army program, as it was called, the audiolingual methodology in the 50s, developed the Americans. And then we had the direct method. And then we have the natural approach. And then finally we have community language teaching. Community language teaching was a little bit better, but again, very prescriptive. And then now we have CLIL, no? And then next, what is it? Before we have TBLT, again, TBLT, not a bad approach, language teacher. This was based on language task, but it's all about these methodologies. So we have to tell the teacher, you have to do this. Is this based on evidence? Or is it based on making money, selling textbooks? Because a friend of mine, Michael Long, a very famous scholar, who just unfortunately died a few years ago, wrote a book saying that most of these people developing textbooks, they just do it for money, but they're not evidence-based. So this methodology, are they evidence-based? I'm not sure. I think we need to, if I develop a teacher training program for teachers, I want to tell them something that works because I have the evidence that works, not because Alessandro Benati thinks that works. So it should be teacher training education should be very evidence-based, and we should really reconnect to second language acquisition. I keep repeating reconnect because in 1985, a colleague of mine wrote a paper called Great Expectations. At that time, there were great expectations from people like myself that were studying very little things, the acquisition of very little syntactic structures, and they were not even thinking about teaching. But there's a lot of expectation from people like me to go to teachers and say, oh, look, if you're teaching this, you should be doing this, this, and that. Don't do this anymore. We failed. We failed because second language researchers, they were not interested in language teaching. They were too snobby, they were up here, they thought the teachers were there. And so they were not communicated, they didn't care. Unfortunately, this is what happened, but 10, 15 years ago, I realized that we have to do this. We have to start talking, we have to start to communicate. And I think now maybe it's time to finally connect to language teaching, language acquisition research. Language teacher, language acquisition researchers should talk. There should be much more communication between the two blocks, I call it. And we need to reconnect to what we know about language acquisition. I want to say, this is a quick slide about saying that there's a lot of, there's a long list of technologies available for AI, CMC, VL, digital materials, blah, blah, blah. But I think I was talking to someone from Hong Kong last week about a project that they have there about language, creating a language environment which is very virtual. But I think the mistake would be to see that this now become a methodology. So we're just teaching using technology. I think that would be a mistake. I think technology should be at the service of teaching in terms of facilitating exposure to comprehensible and meaningful input, facilitate connection between words and meaning, provide effective corrective feedback, provide collaborative learning opportunity, create an optimal task-based learning environment. Those are the things that we need to achieve. So technology should be at the service of that, not the other way around, or certainly not, we should be taking into consideration those. So basically, we should be starting with what we know about language acquisition, and then what we should do in the classroom to enhance that, to facilitate acquisition of languages, and then the technology should be at the service of that. So our way forward is reconnected to second language acquisition. So we have to have more people that in second language acquisition research and theory that talks to teachers and teachings, and teachers that look at the results of second language acquisition research. So this book in one way is trying to bridge that gap, move from belief-based teaching to fact-based teaching. So we need to be careful when we talk about beliefs. We need to check our beliefs, whether we have the facts, whether we have the evidence. Challenge the current compartmental approach, which sees scholar in second language acquisition, I just said, and teacher not communicating at all. They go separate ways, unfortunately, at the moment. Consider changing language curriculum. And I think language curriculum are at least the one I've seen in Ireland for the junior cycle, is actually a good one. As I said, the problem is the mismatch between the curriculum and how it's implemented. Developing evidence-based teacher education programs. I'm doing one at the moment online, CPD online, and I hope that in the future I'll be more and more involved in developing teacher education program, not only in Ireland, but in other countries as well as possible. Continue to develop the new research agenda on the effects of language instruction to provide and explain the main facts. I think that would be crucial. And finally, the integration of new technology in the language classroom is something that we cannot escape from. But as I said, we need to be very careful that we don't substitute that with everything else, because I think, for instance, a language task works very well. The problem is that we need to explain teacher how to develop language tasks, how to make language tasks interactively, ensuring that we engage learners in communication, ensuring that learners exchange information, they negotiate meaning, they do all that for a purpose in a specific context. So I made this is in the book actually. At the end of one of the chapters, there's some question that teachers always asking, do people acquire language via comprehensive and meaningful input? My answer is yes, absolutely. And I think that's what we should do in the classroom. Create the conditions to be exposed in comprehensible and meaningful input is key. Should we use L1, the mother tongue in class? I would say as little as possible. I'm not saying never, but I would say as little as possible. Should students be taught grammar traditionally? No. No. Does correcting learner mistake improve learner performance? Not really, actually, because even recasting, which is, I go to the cinema yesterday and then you say, what did sorry, I go to the cinema. Oh, so you went to the cinema. So I'm recasting the sentence with the correct form. Even that, the research doesn't show that has an effect on language development. So I don't know. I would actually not correct in errors at all. I would keep exposing learner to positive evidence, more input. But don't spend too much time correcting errors. The idea of correcting errors and providing explicit information, that is definitely wrong. Does the question answer paradigm equate to communication? No. Are interacting communicative language tasks effective? Yes, they are. TBLT is a possibility. Task-based language teaching. That approach is a possibility. It's actually a good way of, exposing learner at least to comprehensible and meaningful input, get them to interact, exchange information. For obviously skills like listening, speaking, writing, and reading. Is there a broad agreement among second language acquisition research about what constitutes effective practice? Yes. Can we successfully integrate new technology and language learning? Yes, as a tool to promote acquisition. We need to be very careful. So there has to be like as a tool to promote acquisition. And there's a lot of things we can do with VLE and artificial intelligence, actually. Very interesting stuff. Want to say finally, I think I've got 1 or 2 slides left. This is something that, again, I noticed when I was engaged in Ireland with the MFL junior cycle, that there's a kind of lack of understanding between a task and an exercise. Okay, so I said that before. A task requires the use of target language, first of all. A task is an activity that has an objective and requires interpreting, negotiating meaning. So if there is a breakdown in communication, there is ways of clarifying that, not like say, what did you say? Can you say it again? So you negotiate meaning and using the target language to achieve it. So a task to focus on achieving communication through meaningful use of language in a context and for a purpose. So I'm in a specific context. I don't know, I'm talking to my friends, or I could be at the doctor, surgery, or I could be with my lawyer. And for a purpose, there is always a purpose in communication. No? I get the information from someone and do something with that information. This is a task, and tasks are good. They actually work in a classroom. I did a lot of class action research with teachers in teacher education when I was in the UK. A lot of that, and it worked. They were, much better when they compare what they do with the textbooks. A reading comprehension task, which is simply reading and translating, or reading and answering questions, and you have a proper pre-reading, while reading, post-reading. You have a proper language task when you are the architect, you design that, but the students are the co-builder. They have to complete the task, and they have to take initiative, exchange information, clarifying things. You see them huge amount of more language they're exposed to, and really you can actually see. You don't need an experiment. You can actually measure that. But an exercise, traditional textbooks are full. I'm saying, in my country, Italy, is actually crazy. They're all exercise. They don't know the word task. An exercise is really an activity that focuses on language mechanics and use language out of context complete. In an exercise, students don't even have to understand the words. They mechanically transform and change in things, and so no communication, zero. No exposure to language, proper exposure to language, nothing. So this is important. We need to, again, teacher training. We have to provide we have to make a clear distinction between an exercise and a task, and show teachers how to develop language tasks. There's specific guideline that you can use. There's plenty of examples. There's a lot of textbooks, not just in English, for teaching English, but for teaching all other languages. So the 3 pillars, in my view, for effective language teaching are the knowledge of what communication is, the knowledge of what language is, and the knowledge about how acquisition happens. 3 modules. Teacher training, the one I'm developing at the moment, has 3 modules online. Each module deals with one of the 3 principles, the 3 pillars. This is some reference for you. I'm very happy to share this with you if you're interested in reading any of the paper. This is the book that I'm launching today. There's more initiatives that are psycholinguistic. We have a psycholinguistic lab it's a very small lab. It's actually my office at the moment. I just bought an eye tracker, one of the ones that are very cheap, because the eye tracker is very expensive. One of the ones that I can mount myself, and 6,000 euro, but it's good, it's still working. And so we have 2 new PhD students in our lab from China. So they join us, our lab, and we're conducting research, but basically, we have a number of events. So this is the first one, but I do have a book launch very soon for Cambridge University Press. It's a book that we're writing on called Key Questions in Second Language Acquisition. This is just the cover. I don't have the whole full information because it has been accepted for publication. And in this book, we'll argue a lot of the things that I said today to you, but also we have a conference in March. The conference is called Back to Basics. That's what we need. Principle in Contemporary Language Teaching According to Science. This is very important. I'm very proud about the title, According to Science. Last week, I told the students that we are in the science building. I said, yes, let's talk about language teaching according to science. And so this is a little symposium, and this the people have been invited are people expert in learning vocabulary, learning grammar, learning language, but they're all going to give a talk to teachers. I said to them, don't talk about jargon, don't talk about your research, don't talk about your sophisticated study that you publish in the top journals. I don't care. You're going to, you have to talk to teachers, so you have to explain what's the link between theory and practice about vocabulary, learning and teaching, grammar, learning and teaching, and language in general. Okay, acquisition. That's it. That's all I want to say. Thank you.
Lecture on second language. So now is the question and answer section. The floor open. That's it all.
This is one of my students in the B.Ed. First year student, very good, all very good. Approach is that there has to be a priest reading, writing, listening, speaking phase in which, for instance, in the case of reading, we have to develop activities which bridge the gap between the text and the knowledge of the individual or the group. And then in the while reading, they have to engage with the text, but you don't give them a text and then otherwise you give them the text, the first things they do is start translating word by word. So you want to avoid that. So you just manage this by giving part of the text and make them interact with the meaning and picking up the meaning. But, there's a number of techniques that you're using. But I think they actually, the way you teach, the way you implement the TBLT is understanding basically the nature and role of task. That's the most important thing. Once you understood that, then implementation and also producing your own activities, you can develop your own activities. It's not that difficult, it's not that demanding. There are textbooks, of course, you can use, but you can develop your own task and make it actually possibly a little bit more tailored to the level, for instance, of your students, and whether the beginners or intermediate. Because you can use language tasks with beginner students, because sometimes people say, oh, well, with beginners, what do you do with beginners? They know nothing. Don't underestimate students in general, first of all. They know much more than what you think. And also you can use a lot of linguistic and non-linguistic means to expose actually students to language that it could be quite complicated from the start. There's actually research that's done that. I can show you an example if you're interested. This is a famous family tree study where a beginner's teacher of Spanish comes in a classroom and he does a lesson about his family. And this is complete beginners, so that they don't know a word of Spanish. But he's using this is a study done many years ago. He's using a photograph, and obviously they see him, they recognize him, and they obviously see two people, one on the left, one on the right. It looks like a woman, old man, and they know it's the mom and dad, and so on. So he's using non-linguistic means to introduce even complex language. Don't know whether I answer your question.
Yes.
In the response to the last question, both for intellectual talent
Hmm.
and underestimate capacity for learning, I wanted to ask you about the implications of what you said about tasks, and I think in my own language, immersion as a form of learning.
Yeah.
And the implications of it for learning across a university, not simply the languages, the link is research and cognition, and how students learn, and what implications are on intellectual talent for what we can and should be doing with students across all disciplines, not just language acquisition.
Yeah, it's a difficult question. I need to think about it. Can I phone a friend? I really need to phone a friend for this one. I don't know really. This is, you know, that the president of IHKU, when I started the job, asked me similar questions about all these things. Alessandro, you're talking about language. How do you transfer this into teaching other subjects? I don't know, but certainly I think that what I would say, this is, I don't know whether I could answer your question, but what I would say top of my head is that one of the things we take into consideration is always evidence. Is always, we need to know how we learn things. You know, if we think that language learning is simply imitating a behavior, or is simply repeating, or is simply learning a rule, then I think that's wrong. We make a huge mistake. So we need to understand exactly what happened when we learn languages. And we know, for instance, that we learn a language through connecting a word and its meaning. No? So we hear a sentence that has the word car, and we connect car with the idea that is a vehicle with 4 wheels. That if we make that connection at mental level, then we start processing language. So we intake the language, and then obviously the language then is restructured and pushed into the system, and then other things happening. So I think the basic of everything should be knowing how the best way of learning something, and then trying to find methodologies that they are successful because they are evidence-based and cognitive-based. But I don't know the specific. You tell me, how would you do that in teaching, I don't know, science or maths? Not sure. But certainly you need to make things accessible and comprehensible to people. Because sometimes we're using a lot of jargon in explaining things. A professor sometimes is not the best teacher, I would say. Because, you know, you can go on and on and on, be very deep in explaining things, but then the students might not understand. So when I wrote this book, I made a huge effort to try to turn things that are very, very complex in something that is accessible. So accessibility is also something we should take into. But I don't know whether I answer your question, Colin. It's too difficult. You're too intelligent and asking too difficult questions.
I thought, as the Benati's commission,
Yes.
actually,
She has already got the book, by the way. Because it was given to all the students as a present. So she's got the book. It's okay. That's the third question. So Alessandro, you can come, Alessandro.
Obviously, often I speak to the drills and the practice the grammar things, but I wonder.
Can I try to answer the second question first? Okay. So yeah, the reason, I think, is multiple reasons in my view. One of the reasons is that Italy doesn't invest enough money in research, I have to say, in general, unfortunately. Certainly very little money for research on linguistics. Okay, they might be right, because, you know, even in the UK, the last 15 years was in the UK. I mean, it was a struggle because with impact, they didn't care whether you were developing a new theory of linguistics. What is the impact of that? You have to make sure that there is impact. So I understand that. But in Italy, it's just in general, they don't really invest much money on research, so particularly in these areas. That's one thing. The second is, of course, the proliferation of these textbooks that they're based on methods. Rosetta Stone and all new methods. Someone comes up and says, "Oh, I've got a new method," and develop a book and then sell it, and then they use the textbooks. The lack of teacher training. Yeah, the lack of teacher. I've been invited many times in Italy, and there's always the same thing. When I go to Italy, I give a talk, and then I talk about this, and they say, "Oh, we would like to do this. Great, let's do it." They never find the money, and they never find this, and then it's very very political, and so there's a number of reasons. But I think those are probably the three main ones. Now, the first question, I'm not sure I understood. Let me ask it to you whether I understood. You're referring to the fact that there might be different opinion about how languages are learned, and therefore we need to take into consideration different opinion, or is depending on, I didn't understand. Right. Yes. Yeah. This is a good. No, this is a good question.
Chinese
Mhm.
very different from alphabet-based language.
Yes.
Whether
Yeah.
they should share the same.
Yeah, I understand. Also, there are people in the field that they might think slightly different than the things I said to you today. Yeah, I don't. I admit that, but I'm right. But anyway, no, I'm joking. No, but yeah, no. First of all, I think yes, I know about the alphabet, but I do believe that we learn language. The way we learn languages is universal. I'm a generativist, so I do believe in universal grammar. But I think universal grammar is not the only element for learning languages. Of course, it's the language input, is also your L1, no? But I do think that the learning language is very similar across languages. So the idea that one language, when people say this language is more complex, to me, I kind of disagree, because I think, yes, of course, in terms of the linguistic elements and characteristics, of course, but in terms of processing languages, I think we do have internal mechanism, all of us, human beings have. We have two systems, two working memory systems, and they're both limited on processing information. Can go on and on. There's so many similarities. So I would be careful to say that because this is a different language, or because this is, but I could say to you that there are people in the field, in my field, that they have misled, in my view, teachers. For instance, without mentioning names, but there are people that they go to teach and say, keep going, keep correcting errors, keep practicing grammar. It's okay. It's fine, And I think they are misleading them. It's quite dishonest, actually, because we perfectly know that it's not working. So I think that it's not a question of, before I mentioned to you that some of the research is not very scientific, in my view, and very anecdotal. I think there's a lot of that, unfortunately, in the field. So when I wrote the book, I tried to be honest in terms of, I want to tell these new teachers, future teachers, I'm going to a country where they're investing in, bringing up these new teachers. I felt responsible in one way and thought, hold on a sec, I need to tell them how it is. Not what I think, but how it actually is, how people learn language, what are the main, principle behind that, blah, blah, and see whether there is implication for teachers. There's a lot of implication for teachers. The book is, the first 4 chapters are language learning, then the next 7 chapters are all about language teaching, providing a lot of options that you have in a classroom, for instance, to teach grammar, or to correct errors, or to develop reading, or writing, or speaking, or listening, and also using technology. So I give them a lot of options, non-tradition option and evidence-based. I understood the first part of your question, but not the second. Let me answer the first part. You asked for a definition of language, no? You asked me what? Okay. Let's stop. Definition of my view is this. Language, first of all, I'll tell you what language is not. Language is not a skill. And that language is not that is learned by practicing things. And language is no rules in the classic sense, the one we find in textbooks. That is not definitely language. I think language is, number one, implicit. It's something that we acquire implicitly. So if the system, internal system in our mind/brain is implicit, we have no control of that. It's developing because information goes into the system in the form of connections. And as those connections, lexical, semantic, quite complex, but as those connection grows, the system develops, but it develops implicitly. So the practice doesn't make any difference because acquisition goes from input to output, and in between this system then develops. Traditional instruction focus on output only, so it skip all the stages of acquisition. We say put the cart before the horses. That's what we do with language teaching, traditional language teaching. So language is implicit, number one. Two is abstract. I cannot describe. You know, when I see those connections, I can tell you, I said before, you're connecting this and that, but the realities are more like mathematical formulas that they come together with already an initial structure, because I believe that we have I believe in universal grammar. That's because I'm a generativist. There is an initial structure when we're born. There's the architecture of language with certain principles that interact with language. So I think it's abstract, implicit, and very complex, because as I said to you, it's multi-componential. It's about a number of things that you have to learn, but there is a difference, remember, between the competence, so the actual internal system, and the performance. Because my accent is very Italian, so someone can say, oh, Alessandro, you're native-like. You're non-native-like English. But my competence is, because I think in English and I connect things in English, so I reach a competence, I believe, in terms of in terms of English language, but not my pronunciation. But that doesn't mean performance and competence are two different things. Like skill and language are two different things. So my problem is that we have to clarify this. It's got to be clear. Research needs to be clear about this. Some of my colleagues are not very clear. When I read the research, I say, hold on a sec, what's your view of language? When they say I measure this and I measure that, they're not very clear about what they measure sometimes. So then there was a second part of the question that I didn't understand, sorry. Yeah. We communicate, we communicate sometimes using language-like behavior. So that's not implicit knowledge. So when we teach language explicitly, we can teach chunks of the language, and someone can say puts very simple phrases, a very simple sentence, and create very simple sentence to communicate. But that's not what we call communication, and also we know communication and language acquisition are two different things. So, but you communicate also using gesture. It's not just using the language, no? Italian use a lot of gesture. But yeah. Yeah.
I totally see how well you could keep it to the class version with these maps. But I'm struggling to understand how you could go from 0 to 1. And like, for example, like 2 weeks ago, I think I was fast, like I'm not right. I go to the class, like, I didn't go to the second class. You know what I mean? Like, because we didn't do the language, we didn't do the reading. I felt like I was expected to perform way above my abilities. So I don't think underestimate is a good thing, but also overestimating the often confuse students in very confident ways.
Yeah, but you know, I don't know. And I haven't actually seen a proper language class at UCD. I don't know whether language is still traditional or not in language department. I have no idea. The one thing I could say though is this: I noticed that this is not here, but other institutions, is that language departments, unfortunately, sometimes are set with in a way that non-expert of language teach language. So literature, for example. So if you're an expert of literature, in my view, you shouldn't be teaching language. Literature is great. I love literature. But there's a difference between literature and language. So sometimes they're mixing this. But anyway, I don't know here. But the thing is this, no? So the languages are learned by being exposed to language input, and that is meaningful, and it is, and this is a fact, I said, no, that is meaningful and comprehensible. So you might learn a language, you might learn a behavior about language, you might develop your behavior, you might be good at something that you do, but acquisition is different than that. So as you said, your drills might have worked, but they work to develop your language like behavior. They will not definitely responsible for your implicit system. Implicit system, you develop your implicit system by being exposed to language, to the input over the years. And so your system developed because of that, I'm pretty sure. But obviously, classrooms, you know, language teaching is based on, you know, curriculums that they're very traditional, and they have to cover the curriculum, and they have to test you, and they have to, and so then this is you know, the policy that countries like in Greece or Italy they have. So they have to follow a very you know, structured curriculum, they call it, and then you have to cover grammar, and you have to cover this, and you cover that, and you're going through the process. So when you are, so what happens is that the students, in my view, get psychologically attached to that. So if you go into an Irish class, and I don't know, I'm just guessing, you're exposed to the language from the start. So the use of the target language all the time, obviously is a shock. But the reality is that that kind of immersion, in the long run, it would work. Whereas your drilling and structural syllable doesn't.
One final
Sure.
question?
Yeah. There's no more books though. I finished. I only had 3. I give it to you. I'm not. I'll explain. Go ahead, ask me the question. Okay, there's many questions in your question, but it's very good. Thank you. Lots of good things you said that I disagree with, but I'll try to explain now. So the first thing is that I never said that we shouldn't be teaching grammar. Again, we need to be very careful because I never said that. I never said that in my life. I always said that it's not whether or not we teach grammar, it's how we do it. Now, if we teach grammar, if we think that the grammar should be taught by providing a lots of long explanation, rules, and then mechanical practice, which is usually is drilling the form. There is a sentence and I have to transform it. And I don't need to even understand anything in the sentence. I just transform it. I play tennis and I have to just be played because I transform from the present to the past. If that is the practice, doesn't work. That I disagree that that is the way to teach grammar, but I think I suggested many, many times over the last 30 years, I wrote a lot about this, that we should teach grammar using input-based options like textual enhancement, input flood, structure input. There's a lot of type of grammar in structure actually works. Why? Because it helps the internal processing to connect form and meaning, for instance. So increase your knowledge, your internal system, your competence, okay? So your implicit knowledge. If you teach languages by teaching the rules and then make people practice mechanically, all you do is that you maybe, not all the time, maybe sometime you are actually develop the explicit system, but the explicit and implicit does not connect. They are separate. When you say before, you just said yourself, you said before, you know, you can monitor. When you start monitoring, you're using your explicit knowledge. And again, explicit and implicit do not connect. And this doesn't come from me. It comes from research, evidence. It's not me. Speak to a neurolinguist. Neurolinguists will tell you the two systems are biologically separated. So there is no connection. So again, it's a misconception. We still believe that make people practice like this eventually gets you to learn the language, but it doesn't. I swear, it's not me, it's the evidence, it's what the research is that the problem is that we're not telling these things enough to teachers, and we don't show the options. Because it's one thing to say, this doesn't work. And the teacher say, okay, what should I do then? There's millions of things you can do, much, much better than what you're doing. And here's what you can do. This is what we have to do, but we never bother doing that for many, many years. But I'm interested in that because I'm a language teacher. I love teaching languages, so I'm interested, you know, to connect things. And many other people are. There's a lot of actually interesting books that would constitute good textbook for our teacher training program. But we need to change the teacher training programs, in my view.
I think it's about time to move to the question and answer session. So I suggest we put hands together to thank Professor. Thank you.
Do I stand here or should I stand here?
那么接下来，为了感谢 Professor Alessandro Benati 带来的精彩演讲，接下来我们将由王院长为 Professor Alessandro Benati 送出一份特别证书以及礼品。In order to thank Professor Alessandro Benati for his wonderful speech, a special gift and certificate of appreciation will be present to Professor Benati by Professor Wang.
Fantastic talk.
Shall I take more? Oh, wow. There's a TV. Picture up.
Yeah, thank you for your question. Really.
谢谢大家对本次论坛的支持，特别感谢 Professor Alessandro Benati 带来的精彩演讲，以及主办方都柏林大学爱尔兰中国研究院、都柏林大学孔子学院、都柏林大学教育学院、爱尔兰中国学生学者研究联谊会和都柏林大学中国学生学者联谊会的有序组织。现在，爱尔兰中国研究院系列讲座第56届孔子博士论坛圆满结束。Thank you all very much for attending, and a special thanks Professor Alessandro Benati for his wonderful lecture, as well as to the UCD Irish Institute for Chinese Studies, UCD Confucius Institute, UCD School of Education, and the Chinese Students and Scholars Association of Ireland, and the UCD Chinese Students and Scholars Association for their meticulous organization. The Irish Institute for Chinese Studies Public Lecture Series and the 56th Confucius PhD Forum have come to a successful conclusion. 学院为大家准备了丰盛的中式晚餐，请大家有序前往用餐。祝你们度过一个充实快乐的晚上，谢谢大家。We have prepared a sumptuous Chinese dinner for everyone. Please proceed to dinner in an orderly manner. I wish you all a delightful and fulfilling evening. Thank you.